Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Boss Economics World, where we peel back the curtain on the economic circus and expose the clowns running the show. Today, we've got a doozy for you, straight from the heart of Westminster, where the UK government is juggling flaming torches of bad policy, slow growth, and a budget hole so big, it could swallow the entire GDP of a small nation. And who's left holding the bag? You guessed it, you, the taxpayer, the hard-working backbone of this crumbling economic empire. So, grab your calculators, folks, because we're diving headfirst into the UK's latest fiscal fiasco, courtesy of Chancellor Rachel Reeves and her merry band of fiscal illusionists. Let's break it down, from the surface-level chaos to the deep, systemic rot, and trust me, it's worse than you think. Let's start with the headline act, shall we? The UK government is staring down a budget deficit that could be anywhere between £8 billion and £22 billion, according to Deutsche Bank's chief UK economist Sanjay Raja. But wait, Bloomberg Economics' Dan Hansen says it's more like £20 billion, thanks to a GDP outlook so gloomy, it makes a British winter look cheerful. Oh, and don't forget the cherry on top, Rachel Reeves needs to restore her fiscal buffer, which stood at £9.9 billion in spring 2025. Add it all up, and by autumn 2025, she might need to scrounge up a cool £30 billion just to keep the lights on in Whitehall. Now, for the ordinary folks out there, those of you who've been watching your savings shrink faster than a cheap umbrella in a storm, this is what happens when a government spends like a teenager with a stolen credit card, only to realize the bill's due and the bank account's empty. And for my finance pros in the audience, let me hit you with some cold, hard numbers. The UK's public sector net debt is already at 99.4% of GDP as of June 2025, according to the Office for National Statistics, ONS. That's the highest level since the early 1960s, folks. And with borrowing costs rising, 10-year gilt yields hit 4.2% in July 2025, per Bloomberg data. This is a government teetering on the edge of a fiscal cliff, with markets watching like hawks for any sign of weakness. So, how did we get here? Spoiler alert, it's not just bad luck. It's bad policy, bad management, and a government that seems allergic to economic reality. Let's dig deeper, shall we? First up, let's talk about the government's favorite pastime, policy U-turns. Over the past few weeks, we've seen a parade of costly reversals that would make even the most indecisive teenager blush. From scrapping infrastructure projects to backtracking on tax cut promises, every flip-flop comes with a price tag, and guess who's footing the bill? Yep, you, the taxpayer. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, IFS, estimates that these reversals have already cost the Treasury upwards of £5 billion in lost efficiency and market confidence. And that's just the direct cost, never mind the ripple effects on investor sentiment, which has taken a nosedive faster than a lead balloon. Take the HS2 rail project, for example. After years of dithering, the government slashed the northern leg of the project in 2023, only to announce in early 2025 that they might revive parts of it, surprise, surprise, at a higher cost due to inflation and restarted contracts. The National Audit Office, NAO, pegged the cost of this indecision at £1.2 billion in wasted preparatory work alone. And don't even get me started on the green energy flip-flops, pledging net zero targets one day, then watering down climate goals the next. Panmure Liberum's Simon French estimates that these climate policy wobbles could cost the economy £3 billion in lost green investment by 2030. Now, for my finance pros, let's talk markets. Every time the government flip-flops, it sends a signal of uncertainty, and markets hate uncertainty. Just look at the pound, it's down 2.3% against the dollar year-to-date as of July 2025, per Reuters data, largely because investors are spooked by this policy ping-pong. And with the Bank of England, BOE, already grappling with inflation, still stubbornly above the 2% target at 2.6% in June 2025, per ONS, this is a government pouring fuel on the fire of economic instability. Next up, let's talk about the elephant in the room, growth, or rather, the lack thereof. The UK economy is limping along like a three-legged dog, with GDP growth projected at a measly 0.8% for 2025, according to the Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR. Compare that to the Eurozone's 1.2% or the US's 2.1%, per IMF forecasts, and you've got a textbook case of economic stagnation. And why is growth so anemic? Oh, just a little thing called government mismanagement. For starters, weak tax receipts are a huge problem. The ONS reported in June 2025 that tax revenues were £2.3 billion below forecasts for the fiscal year, largely because businesses and workers are making less money in this low-growth environment. And yet, spending demands are soaring. Think NHS funding, welfare payments, and public sector pay rises. The IFS estimates that these pressures could add £15 billion to annual spending by 2027 if left unchecked. So, you've got a government trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it, while simultaneously pouring water out the other side. And let's not forget the tax burden, which is already at a 76-year high, per OBR data. The UK's tax to GDP ratio hit 37.1% in 2024, the highest since the post-World War II era. Now, for my ordinary viewers, let me break this down. That means for every £100 you earn, £37.10 is going straight to the government. And what do you get for it? Crumbling infrastructure, NHS waiting lists longer than a Tolstoy novel, and an economy that's growing slower than a snail on sedatives. For my finance pros, consider this: high taxes are a disincentive to investment and labor participation, as noted by OBR board member David Miles. Just look at business investment, it's down 0.9% year-on-year as of Q1 2025, per ONS data, as companies hoard cash instead of expanding in this high-tax, low-confidence environment. Now, let's zoom out to the big picture: fiscal credibility. The financial markets are on high alert, and for good reason. Every policy misstep, every budget shortfall, erodes confidence in the UK's ability to manage its finances. Incoming IFS Director Helen Miller hit the nail on the head: what matters now is how this government's fiscal credibility is perceived. And folks, the perception ain't good. Just look at the bond markets. UK 10-year gilt yield spiked to 4.2% in July 2025, a level not seen since the mini-budget crisis of 2022, per Bloomberg data. Why? Because investors are terrified of two things: policy loosening, read, more borrowing, and tax rises, read, growth-killing levies. Both paths lead to the same destination: an unsustainable fiscal trajectory. The IMF warned in its April 2025 World Economic Outlook that the UK's debt-to-GDP ratio could hit 105% by 2030 if current trends continue, putting it in the same league as heavily indebted nations like Italy. And then there's the Labour Party's refusal to cut welfare spending, which, as Helen Miller notes, intensifies speculation about tax rises. Labour Deputy Leader Angela Rayner is reportedly pushing for wealth taxes, abolishing reliefs on property, dividends, IM shares, and pensions, which could raise £4 billion, per a May 2025 Daily Telegraph memo. Former PM Gordon Brown wants to hike gambling duties, adding another £4 billion, per Sanjay Raja's estimates. But here's the kicker: higher taxes in an already overtaxed economy could backfire spectacularly. Just look at France. Its 2023 wealth tax hike led to a net outflow of 12,000 millionaires, per Henley and Partners data, and a 0.3% drag on GDP growth, per OECD estimates. Is that the future Reeves wants for the UK? So, how does Rachel Reeves plan to plug this £30 billion hole? Well, folks, it's a smorgasbord of half-baked ideas and wishful thinking. Let's break down the options, shall we? Option 1, change the fiscal rules. Reeves has pledged to cover day-to-day spending with tax receipts by 2029-2030, but Labour's Annalise Dodds is pushing to move to a 5-year rolling target instead. This would give Reeves an extra £3 billion to £4 billion to play with, per IFS estimates. Sounds great, right? Wrong. This is just accounting trickery, kicking the can down the road while pretending you've solved the problem. For my finance pros, consider this: markets see through this nonsense. Just look at Italy's rolling targets in the early 2000s, they led to a 15 basis point increase in bond yields, per ECB data, as investors lost faith in fiscal discipline. Option 2, raise taxes. Reeves has promised not to touch the big four taxes: income tax, national insurance, VAT, or corporation tax. So, what's left? Freezing income tax thresholds until 2030, which could raise £7 billion to £10 billion, per IFS estimates. Having the VAT registration threshold for businesses, adding another £1 billion, per RSM accountants. But here's the problem: higher taxes kill growth. Just look at the Laffer curve. Empirical data from the US Congressional Budget Office shows that tax rates above 35% start to reduce revenue by discouraging economic activity. And with the UK's tax burden already at a 76-year high, we're dangerously close to that tipping point. Option 3, growth measures. Reeves could try to boost growth, which would increase tax receipts. The OBR estimates that recent planning reforms could add £2 billion to revenues, while trade deals with the EU and India could add another £2.5 billion, per Sanjay Raja. But here's the catch: these are long-term fixes, not quick cash. And with the government's track record of policy U-turns, who's going to trust them to deliver? Option 4, tax avoidance and Bank of England reforms. The government could crack down on the £46.8 billion tax gap, potentially raising £7.5 billion by 2029-2030, per OBR estimates. And then there's the BOE's quantitative easing losses, £30 billion a year, thanks to paying 4.25% on reserves while earning 2.5% on gilts. One fix is to mimic the ECB and pay no interest on some reserves, saving £1 billion. Another is to change the accounting treatment of QE losses, saving £25 billion, per Treasury estimates. But here's the rub: these are one-off fixes, not structural solutions. And for my finance pros, consider this: meddling with the BOE's independence could spook markets, as seen in Turkey in 2021, where central bank interference led to a 30% currency devaluation, per Reuters data. So, there you have it, folks, a government drowning in debt, flip-flopping on policy, and taxing the life out of an economy that's already on life support. And what's their solution? More taxes, more borrowing, and a few accounting tricks to make it look like they've got it under control. But here's the truth, ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just a budget hole, it's a credibility hole. It's a government that's lost the plot, lost the trust of markets, and lost sight of what it takes to build a thriving economy. And who pays the price? You, the ordinary worker, the small business owner, the investor trying to make sense of this mess. So, tell me, Westminster, when are you going to stop treating the economy like a casino and start treating it like the backbone of our nation? Until next time, this is Boss Economics World, signing off.